The first thing I remember is the soft, metallic click of a door that wasn't fully closed. A narrow slice of light falling across polished wood like a spotlight on a truth I wasn't ready to meet. Laughter his carried in that careful, intimate register men save for private rooms and private women. The office smelled like leather and citrus polish, and there was a silk scarf draped over the back of his chair that didn't belong to me, a flash of crimson against slate gray. I stood a moment longer than anyone would call reasonable palm's damp heart, moving slow and heavy, as if my body were trying to buy me a few more seconds of the life I had before that sound, that scarf, that light. When I finally reached for the handle, the edge of my wedding band scraped the brass and made a sound so small it felt almost like a prayer asking me not to look. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if stories like this help you feel stronger. Tap like and subscribe. Your support turns quiet hurt into louder justice. My name is Claire, and I grew up learning how to smooth rough places so everyone else could keep walking. Mom worked 2 jobs after Dad passed, and I was the daughter who learned to stretch a dollar and keep a smile steady, the one who remembered birthdays and packed leftovers into neat containers because love should feel practical. My sister Sasha had a different talent. She could make any room bend toward her the way flowers tilt toward the sun, and people said she was born for big city things while I made a good home out of small necessary ones. When I met Andrew, I thought I'd found a man who appreciated quiet strength, someone who liked the way a steady life can hold you in both hands. We had a little mortgage and a big coffee pot, and for a while, our mornings felt like promise. I built a freelance studio one client at a time, drawing clean lines and listening closely until a company's story revealed itself, and I loved the work because it rewarded patience more than noise. Andrew carried a heavier briefcase with each promotion, and there were dinners with partners where I wore a navy dress and a careful smile, and reminded myself that ambition doesn't always mean arrogance. Sasha slipped into that world with ease, recommending photographers for the firm's charity gala and swapping cards with people whose last names landed on plaques, and I told myself that family is allowed to overlap when both sides are happy. Mom watched us both with the old habit of comparison between her eyebrows, the one that always made me try a little harder, and Sasha laugh a little louder. On Sundays, we brought takeout to her bungalow and pretended we weren't tired. We made a home at the end of a cul-de-sac where the porch light looked kind through winter, and I planted herbs in mismatched pots that made the kitchen smell hopeful. I told myself that marriages settle, that tenderness can learn a different language and still be understood, that long days explain short tempers. When Andrew started coming home later, I lined up reasons like neat little soldiers, trial prep client dinners, traffic, and sent them marching into my doubt until the house felt quiet again. Sasha texted more bright messages about shows she'd seen and rooms she'd conquered, and when she teased Andrew at family dinners, he gave her that amused, brotherly look that used to make me feel safe. Small things collected in corners, though a lipstick smudge on a conference program, a perfume I couldn't name, lingering on a suit jacket, a tone in their laughter that made me feel like I'd arrived late to a conversation about me. I kept going because that's what I knew how to do, keeping lists, paying invoices, setting out coffee cups the night before, like a promise to try again in the morning. I told myself that being the calm one was my gift, that storms pass faster when somebody holds the door steady, that love is partly endurance. But endurance becomes denial when it outlives honesty, and denial is a thin blanket against the kind of chill that creeps in when you realize the person you sleep beside has moved an inch too far away. On the day I brought Andrew lunch at the office to remind us both how simple care can be, the elevator hummed its neutral song, and the hallway smelled like paper and money, and the door to his corner suite didn't catch. I didn't mean to stop when I saw that line of light, but I did one breath, then another, until I understood that the smallest sounds can open the largest truths, and that the scarf on his chair had a pattern I'd seen around my sister's throat. The door eased open beneath my hand, and with that small push, the picture became whole. Andrew's chair was turned slightly from the desk. His gray tie loosened his hands fixed around Sasha's waist, as if she were the only thing keeping him alive. Her auburn hair tumbled forward as she bent toward him, lips pressed to his with the kind of hunger that had gone missing from our marriage so long ago I had stopped counting. My sister's perfume, a musky floral that always lingered too long, clung to the air, and for one still moment, I couldn't move or breathe. She opened her eyes before he did, and instead of shock or shame, she gave me a smile deliberate and cool, like a queen acknowledging a servant who had entered without knocking. When Andrew finally straightened, smoothing his shirt as though he had been preparing for a meeting, there was no panic in his expression. "We should talk," he said, voice level, eyes calm, as if I were the one disrupting something normal. My throat tightened, but I managed to choke out, "About what?" Sasha slid off his lap, unhurried, settling into the leather chair across from him like she belonged there. She crossed her legs and tilted her chin. Her composure practiced her lipstick still smudged against his mouth. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Claire," she said softly, the same tone she used as a child when explaining why she deserved the bigger slice of cake. How long I asked, though my chest already knew the answer. Andrew's gaze flicked toward her before returning to me, that silent exchange cutting deeper than any confession could. 8 months, he said, his tone clinical, almost bored. My birthday. The dinner where Sasha had dazzled his colleagues in a scarlet dress and stayed late to help clean, while Andrew and I argued about his long hours. That night, I had thanked her for being supportive. Now I stood in the same room realizing the betrayal had already taken root then, while I was still offering gratitude to the sister who was stealing my husband. "You've both lost your minds," I whispered. Sasha leaned forward, her bracelets catching the light. "Claire, this is for the best. You and Andrew haven't been close for a long time. Everyone sees it." My hands shook so badly I had to clutch the edge of the desk to steady myself. Andrew added, "The marriage was ending anyway. This only makes it cleaner." Their words layered over each other until I thought I might be sick. They spoke of our vows of years together, of holidays and quiet nights, as though it were all a tired contract ready for shredding. No apology, no remorse, not even an attempt at kindness, only indifference dressed as reason. I drew one long breath and said, "I want you out of the house." Andrew actually laughed, his eyes full of condescension. "Claire, it's my house. My name is on the deed. You'll be the one leaving." Sasha's smile widened, as though she had rehearsed for this exact moment. "Mom already knows," she added. My stomach clenched. "You told her." She nodded, pleased with herself. "She agrees it's time. She said Andrew was always too good for you." The words burned deeper than the sight I had just witnessed. Too good for me, spoken by my own mother, the woman who had raised us after Dad passed, the one I thought would always be my safe place. Now she had chosen her favorite child again, and the choice cut like a blade. My voice cracked when I asked, "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" Sasha shifted back in the chair, graceful, smug. "Mom suggested you move home for a while. She could use the company and you'd be helpful around the house." The suggestion stung worse than a slap. At 35, after building my own business, after crafting a life brick by brick, they wanted me to fold back into my old bedroom like a child who hadn't yet learned how to live. I could barely see through the blur of tears, but I still managed to whisper, "You've already decided everything, haven't you?" Neither of them denied it. I left the office without slamming the door, though my legs felt hollow beneath me. The drive home blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. My fingers locked so tightly around the steering wheel they ached. Our cul-de-sac was quiet, the porch light casting its steady glow, as if nothing inside had changed. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the cheerful yellow front door at the flower boxes I had planted in the spring, trying to understand how something so familiar could already feel like it belonged to strangers. When I finally stepped inside, the house seemed to mock me with every detail. The wedding photo on the mantel, my novels lined beside his law books, the coffee mug I had used that morning still in the sink. All of it looked like mine, yet none of it was. I called Mom. Her voice came through steady, as though she had rehearsed her lines. "Sasha told me you'd be upset, honey." I swallowed hard. "She told you everything." A pause, then. "Enough. You have to understand, Claire, sometimes love just happens. Andrew and Sasha, they make sense together." My chest hollowed as she continued brushing aside my career, calling my work wedding invitations, dismissing the hours and years I had poured into clients and deadlines. "Sasha belongs in his world," she said gently. "You'll find someone more suited to your simpler nature." Simpler. The word wrapped around my ribs like a chain. I ended the call before she could finish, before I could hear more proof that she had chosen Sasha once again. By the time Andrew came home that evening, I had emptied a bottle of wine and felt a strange clarity settle in my chest. He walked in like a man returning from a day at court, briefcase in hand, his expression cautious but not guilty. He loosened his tie and said, "We need to discuss logistics." He pulled a folder from his case, neat documents clipped inside. "I've spoken to my lawyer. This is a reasonable settlement." I flipped through the papers without reading, my voice steady. As I asked, "How much?" he replied, "25,000. I'll also cover moving expenses." I let out a short laugh, one that tasted bitter. 25,000 for my life, my marriage, my home? He shifted uncomfortably, but didn't soften. "It's more than fair, given most of our assets are premarital or in my name." His words turned into background noise as I studied his face, realizing that somewhere along the way, the man I had loved had been replaced by someone who measured everything in terms of ownership. My voice surprised me with its calm. "Fine," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'll be out by the end of the month." He looked relieved, even a little proud. "Good. I'm glad we can handle this maturely." I let him believe it, though inside something sharper than grief was beginning to form. That night, after he closed himself into the guest room, I sat at my desk in the glow of my computer screen. My hands moved across the keyboard, searching, reading, connecting dots I hadn't thought to question before. The more I found, the colder and clearer I became. The betrayal wasn't just an accident, it was a pattern. And I knew then that I wasn't going to vanish quietly into the shadow they had drawn for me. The next morning, I woke with a heavy head and a taste of bitterness that no amount of coffee could rinse away. Andrew moved around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a man already calculating the day's arguments, setting his travel mug on the counter, without once meeting my eyes. He left a few minutes later, briefcase in hand, the sound of the door closing behind him more final than anything he had said the night before. I sat at the table long after he'd gone, staring at the neat stack of papers he had pushed across to me, the tidy numbers that reduced our years together to a lump sum barely enough to cover a used car. I turned to my computer again, fingers restless on the keys, the glow of the screen pulling me deeper into a world I had only glanced at before. I scrolled through property records, bank statements, and old email chains that I had once ignored out of trust. The picture that formed was deliberate, a careful lattice of timing and ownership that left me with nothing but crumbs. The house deed dated just before the wedding, the car leases listed under his firm as business expenses, even the joint account skimmed of any balance larger than rent and groceries. It was as if Andrew had been planning my exit from the moment I entered his life. The more I searched, the colder I became. I thought about the night I sat through one of his firm's dinners, nodding politely, while senior partners praised his foresight and his discipline. I thought about how Sasha leaned in, then her laughter a little too quick at his jokes, her eyes lingering on him a little too long. I hadn't wanted to see it, but the pattern was there, her interest blooming wherever another woman already stood. When I traced her past relationships, I found the same story, repeated men already attached, women she had known or worked beside, bonds she had broken as easily as pulling a thread. Andrew wasn't her first betrayal, and I realized I was far from her first casualty. 3 nights into my search, the doorbell rang just after dusk. I almost didn't answer, but when I opened it, there was Sasha standing on my porch with a bottle of wine and the kind of sympathy that looked more like performance than sincerity. She stepped inside before I could decide whether to allow her, dropping her coat across the arm of the couch as if the house already belonged to her. She poured 2 glasses without asking and handed one to me, the stem pressing into my palm like a dare. "I know you hate me right now," she began, her voice soft and practiced. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know what I feel." "Hate isn't the word." She smiled, relieved, as if my lack of rage were an invitation. "Good, because I really think we can work through this. We're still sisters." The words landed heavy, a grotesque reworking of what sisterhood was meant to mean. I set the glass down untouched. "Were you ever planning to tell me?" She tilted her head, feigning regret. "Of course, we just wanted to be sure first. We didn't want to hurt you unnecessarily." I laughed, short and sharp. "How considerate." Her expression hardened. "Don't be sarcastic. It doesn't suit you." Sasha leaned back, studying me like a case file. "The truth is, Andrew and I challenge each other. We have the same goals, the same drive. You've stayed the same. When was the last time you read something that mattered? When was the last time you really engaged with the world outside your clients' little projects?" Her words sliced with the precision of someone who knew exactly where my insecurities lay. Andrew needs stimulation. He needs someone who can keep up with him. She let the pause linger before adding, "That's not you." I stared at her, absorbing the cruelty in her ease, the way she wore superiority like jewelry. "You're blaming me," I said quietly, "for your affair." She lifted her glass, smiling over the rim. "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying you weren't a good match. But you'll find someone better suited, someone who appreciates your simpler nature." The phrase lodged deep, twisting with the memory of Mom's voice using the same word. Simpler. Not ambitious, not brilliant, not dazzling, just simple. Sasha drained her glass and stood, slipping her phone from her purse. "I should go. Andrew's taking me to dinner with the senior partners tonight." She checked her reflection in the hall mirror, adjusted her necklace, and smiled at me as if we had shared a pleasant evening. "Try not to make this harder than it has to be, for everyone's sake." When the door closed behind her, the silence left behind was different. It wasn't empty. It was sharp, cutting through the last threads of grief that had kept me tethered. I sat for a long time in the living room, staring at the glass she had abandoned on my table, watching the last drops of red settle into the curve of crystal. What I felt wasn't anger, not exactly, and it wasn't heartbreak. It was something cleaner, colder, and far more precise. It was clarity, and it spread through me like ice water after fire. I went back to the computer, opened a fresh folder, and began to save every document, every record, every piece of proof I could find. Their cruelty had been casual, their betrayal, thoughtless, their planning, meticulous. But they had overlooked something important. I had patience, I had skill, and I had finally stopped asking why. That night, I realized grief would not be the end of my story. It would be the beginning of something sharper. And for the first time since walking into that office, I felt steady enough to sleep. What I didn't know yet was that the next step wouldn't come from me at all. It would come from someone far stronger. A woman who made her living fighting men who thought they could outmaneuver the people they had once promised to love. I found her name after 2 sleepless nights searching through lists of attorneys who handled the kind of divorces other lawyers preferred to avoid. Margaret Reeves had a reputation for dismantling men who believed they were untouchable, and her office sat high above the city with windows that looked down on the river. When I walked in, she greeted me with sharp eyes and a handshake that didn't linger, the kind that let you know you'd been measured and found worth her time. She listened in silence as I slid Andrew's settlement offer across the table, her silver pen tapping against the folder as she read. "This is insulting," she said, finally, her voice even. "He calls this generous. He's lying." I gripped the edge of the chair, my palms damp. "He structured everything to leave me nothing," I whispered. Margaret looked up, her gaze steady. "That wasn't an accident. Every major purchase timed before the marriage, every transfer made under the shelter of his firm. This man was planning his escape before you walked down the aisle." The words struck hard. I had thought betrayal began 8 months ago, but the truth was crueler. It had been written into the foundation of our marriage. She set the papers aside and leaned back, studying me, as if waiting for something more. "The question is, Claire, what do you want?" My answer stumbled at first. "I want what's fair." Margaret didn't blink. "Fair is a shifting word. I'm asking what you want." I looked at the skyline through the glass behind her, the city humming with lives that had nothing to do with mine, and I heard myself say, "I want them to understand I won't vanish. I want them to see that I won't be erased." A small smile softened her face. "Now we're getting somewhere." She asked me to tell her about Sasha, about the affair, about the way my mother had folded herself into their story without hesitation. I spoke until my throat ached, describing the casual cruelty, the conversations that painted me as disposable, the way Sasha sipped wine in my living room, while explaining why Andrew needed her brilliance more than my steadiness. Margaret listened, jotting notes without interrupting, her presence steady as stone. When I finished, she said simply, "Your sister works in public relations. Reputation is currency. If hers cracks, the whole house tilts." The thought sent a sharp pulse through me, both frightening and strangely steadying. "What about Andrew?" I asked. "His firm prizes image," she said. "Family values, stability, loyalty. A junior partner carrying on with his wife's sister while hiding assets. That's not the kind of press that wins promotions." I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "So, what do we do?" Margaret folded her hands neatly. "We file on grounds of adultery. We demand a full forensic accounting. We subpoena records that prove timing and intent. It won't erase the hurt, but it will change the ground you're standing on." Her fee made my stomach knot, but I wrote the check from my personal account, nearly emptying the savings I had guarded for years. Walking out of that building, I should have felt fear, but instead, a strange lightness filled me. For the first time since the door to Andrew's office had swung open, I wasn't only reacting. I was choosing. The papers were served the following Monday morning at Andrew's firm. Margaret arranged for a process server to deliver them directly to his office, ensuring the humiliation was public, not private. I knew the exact hour because my phone rang soon after, his voice sharp with fury. "What the hell is this, Claire?" he snapped. "Divorce papers." I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. "I thought that's what you wanted?" He stammered about grounds of adultery, about forensic accounting, about me demanding half of everything. I cut him off. "I'm demanding what I'm entitled to, nothing more." His breathing thickened across the line. "You're making a mistake. This will get ugly." My hand tightened on the phone. "It's already ugly, Andrew. I'm done pretending otherwise." His voice dropped colder than I'd ever heard. I won't let you destroy my career. I have connections. The threat hung there sour and heavy. Are you threatening me? I asked. I'm warning you, he hissed. Take the offer and walk away, or I'll make sure you regret this. I ended the call before the echo of his anger could linger in my ear. By afternoon, Sasha was at my door, her knock sharp enough to rattle the glass. She didn't bring wine this time. Her eyes burned with panic, her words spilling fast. Claire, you have to stop this. Do you even understand what you're doing to him? I leaned against the doorway. I'm getting divorced. That's all. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're being vindictive. Andrew has friends, judges, prosecutors. You can't win this fight. I met her eyes, steady now. Watch me. Her lips trembled, the confident mask slipping. He'll ruin you. You'll never work again. You'll never... Her voice faltered. Never what I pressed. She swallowed hard. Never amount to anything. The words should have crushed me, but instead they revealed something new. She wasn't confident, she was desperate. I opened the door wider, pointing out. Get out of my house. She stayed frozen a moment too long, then turned on her heel, her perfume trailing like smoke. The silence she left behind felt almost clean. That night, I called Margaret, recounting every word, every threat. Good, she said simply. Rattled people make mistakes. Keep a record of everything. She explained how discovery could expose not only financial deception, but any attempt to smear me publicly. If they want to play dirty, we'll let the court see exactly what they are, she said. Her calm steadiness steadied me in return. The first shift came not from me, not even from Margaret, but from the world around Andrew and Sasha. 2 weeks after filing, Margaret received a call from the senior partner at Andrew's firm. They wanted the mess handled quickly, quietly, away from boardrooms and headlines. Pressure was already building. Around the same time, Sasha's professional world began to tremble. A few of her clients received anonymous messages pointing them toward court filings and public records. Contracts she had counted on suddenly looked uncertain. I hadn't lifted a finger yet, the ripple of truth was beginning to move outward. And then came the most unexpected call of all. Andrew's mother, Heidi, a woman who had never warmed to me but had always been polite. Her voice on the line was heavy, almost ashamed. I just heard, she said. About Andrew? About Sasha? I raised my son better than this. Don't let them push you around, Claire. Fight for what you deserve. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Support from someone who had once only tolerated me felt like proof that the tide was shifting. I hung up and stood by the window, watching the city lights scatter across the dark. The world they had built so carefully was beginning to crack, and I realized the story was no longer theirs to control. The next move I knew would come in a room where they couldn't hide behind smiles or threats, a room where truth would finally demand its place. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, the kind of place where men in suits made decisions that shaped other people's lives. Andrew sat across from me with 2 attorneys at his side, his hair less immaculate than usual, dark circles shadowing his eyes. Margaret placed a thick folder in front of her, tapping once to steady the air. She spoke first, her voice cutting clean. My client is prepared to accept a settlement of $200,000, half the equity of the marital home, and lifetime alimony of $3,000 per month. The lead attorney beside Andrew let out a quiet scoff, leaning back in his chair. That's unreasonable, Ms. Reeves. The marriage was barely 2 years, no children, no justification for ongoing support. Margaret didn't flinch. There's documented adultery. There's asset manipulation. And there are records of threats and intimidation. Your client is not negotiating from a place of strength." Silence followed. Andrew shifted in his chair, his eyes darting toward me, then away. Margaret pressed further. "Do you dispute the adultery?" The attorney said nothing. "Do you dispute the financial structuring intended to deny Claire her rightful share?" Again silence. "Do you dispute that both Andrew and Ms. Whitman made threatening remarks toward her reputation and livelihood?" Andrew's jaw tightened, his composure breaking. "Claire," he said, his voice brittle, "let's be reasonable." I met his eyes without blinking. "I am being reasonable. I'm asking for half of what we built, nothing more. You're offering less than you'd spend on a car lease." He rubbed his temples, the confident lawyer mask slipping into something tired and desperate. "You're asking for more than I can give." Margaret cut in, her voice firm. Then he should have thought of that before he chose betrayal over honesty. The meeting adjourned without agreement, but I walked out steadier than I had walked in. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with Andrew's number. I considered letting it ring, but something in me wanted to hear what his voice sounded like without an audience. "Just us," he said when I answered. "No attorneys, please." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, neutral ground, where neither of us held memories. He looked older when he walked in, shoulders bent beneath a suit that no longer carried the same weight. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us from untouched cups. "I never wanted it to turn into this," he began. "Not like this." His hands trembled slightly as he ran them over his face. "I thought it would be cleaner. That you'd take the settlement and move on." "Disappear quietly," I said, my voice steady. He winced, but didn't deny it. "I know you hate me," he whispered, "but we were friends once. I don't want us to destroy each other." I leaned back, studying him carefully. "I'm not destroying you, Andrew. I'm surviving. There's a difference." His eyes flickered with something, regret maybe, or only exhaustion. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He was silent for a long moment. "I regret hurting you. I regret the way it happened. But I don't regret Sasha." His honesty felt like another knife sharp but clarifying. At least now I knew the measure of him. "What do you want from this?" he asked quietly. "What will make you feel justice has been served?" I stared at the table between us, tracing a small water stain with my finger. "I want to know actions have consequences, that people can't tear lives apart without cost." He exhaled slowly. "Then I'll agree to the settlement, all of it. The house, the money, the alimony." I raised my eyes, searching for the trick. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Because I'm tired. Because fighting you is bleeding me dry. And because in the end, Sasha isn't worth losing what little dignity I have left." 2 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. Andrew kept the house, but took out a loan to pay me my share. The alimony and cash settlement gave me enough to buy a small home of my own, a place untouched by their shadows. Walking out of the courthouse that day, papers in hand, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief, threaded with self-respect. But the ripple of consequence didn't end there. Andrew had been worried about reputation, and he was right to be. Reporters had begun sniffing around, not because I had courted them, but because public filings and rumors spread on their own. A local journalist reached out to me, connecting my story to broader conversations about women left behind in high-conflict divorces. I hesitated, then agreed to share resources, not details. For the first time, my skills in design felt like more than a business. They felt like tools to help women find their voices. Meanwhile, Sasha's clients began to slip away one by one. Fashion houses don't like scandals that stain their brand, and whispers about affairs and lawsuits clung tighter than perfume. I saw her once outside a downtown restaurant. Her smile forced her eyes darting to see who was watching. She looked smaller than I remembered. She didn't approach me. The cracks widened further when Andrew's mother called again. "You were right to fight," she told me, her voice softer than I had ever heard. "I don't know what's happened to my son, but I respect you for standing tall." That respect mattered more than I wanted to admit. For months, I had been the one pushed aside, the one dismissed as simple, steady, forgettable. Now, I was the one holding the line, the one showing them that erasure was not my fate. Yet even with the settlement signed, I knew the story wasn't finished. The damage to Andrew's career was only beginning to surface, and Sasha's glittering world was already collapsing in on itself. I could feel the weight shifting, tilting everything in a direction they hadn't foreseen. And deep down, I knew the sharpest consequences had not yet arrived. The firm's conference room was brighter than the last time, the floor-to-ceiling windows spilling daylight across polished stone and steel. I sat on one side of the table with Margaret at my shoulder, her notes spread in careful stacks. Across from us, Andrew hunched between his attorneys. His suit rumpled, his complexion pale. His voice had lost the confident cadence of a lawyer. He sounded instead like a man cornered. The golden boy of Morgan and Ellison now looked like someone fighting not just for assets, but for the story he had always told about himself. Margaret began without preamble, her voice precise. "My client is still prepared to accept the terms we laid out previously. 200,000, half the home's equity and permanent alimony." Andrew's attorney tried to dismiss the demand as unreasonable, but Margaret pressed with calm persistence. She recited the record of adultery, the financial trail designed to exclude me, the threats delivered in anger, the attempts at intimidation. Each detail landed like weight on the table, and the silence that followed was heavier still. Andrew finally broke it, his hands gripping the armrests. "Claire, this isn't you. You're vindictive. You're dragging us all through the mud for no reason." I kept my voice quiet, but steady. "You built this mud. I'm only refusing to sink into it." His eyes narrowed, his composure cracking. "Do you know what this is doing to me at the firm? Do you know the calls I've gotten?" Margaret's pen tapped once against the folder. "Perhaps Mr. Cole should consider why journalists find his story worth covering. Scandals don't stick unless they reveal something compelling." Andrew's face drained of color. His attorney leaned forward, his tone clipped. "If this continues, there will be consequences. Rumors leaks your client may regret drawing so much attention." Margaret didn't even blink. "Discovery works both ways. If you'd like to open every private conversation between Mr. Cole and Ms. Whitman, we'll gladly comply. A jury might find their threats to defame my client interesting." I watched Andrew's jaw tighten, his hand clenching around the pen he hadn't used. The meeting ended without resolution, but the balance had shifted. Margaret gathered her papers with the calm of someone who had expected no less. As we walked out, she murmured, "He's rattled. That's when mistakes multiply." "We'll be ready." That night, Andrew called me directly. His voice was softer than I had ever heard, edged with exhaustion. "Can we meet? No lawyers, no theatrics, just us." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We chose a coffee shop near the library neutral ground with quiet corners. When he arrived, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his eyes lined with shadows. He sat across from me, both hands around the mug, though he never drank. "I never meant for it to get this bad," he said. "I thought we'd end things quietly. I thought you'd want the same." His words floated like smoke, familiar but empty. "Quiet for you," I answered. "Invisible for me." He winced, his gaze dropping. "I know I've hurt you." "I regret that." But Claire, I don't regret Sasha. The honesty was brutal, but in its own way, it steadied me. I was no longer looking for remorse. "What do you want from this?" he asked after a long silence. "If you could name it plainly, what would make this feel over?" I thought of the months spent unraveling his plans, the night Sasha had smirked across my living room, my mother's voice calling me simple. "I want consequences," I said. "I want proof that people don't get to discard others without cost." Andrew leaned back, his shoulders sagging. "Then I'll agree to the settlement. All of it. The loan, the money, the alimony. I'll sign." His voice cracked. "Because I'm tired. Because fighting you is tearing me apart. And because Sasha isn't who I thought she was." His laugh came hollow bitter. She wanted the successful lawyer, not the man picking through wreckage. 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. The house became his, but the payment to me came with heavy strings loans. He could barely shoulder whispers at his firm that grew louder by the week. I walked away with enough to build something of my own, but more than that, I walked away with the knowledge that I had not been erased. Still, the storm did not stop at the courthouse doors. Journalists called Margaret, regularly digging into Andrew's record. Sasha's professional shine dulled as clients fled one after another, unwilling to tie their brands to scandal. And Andrew himself looked thinner each time I glimpsed him in passing, the proud stride replaced by something slower, heavier. I had thought the settlement would be the end, but instead, it was the hinge. The real consequences had only begun to unfold, and neither Andrew nor Sasha had yet seen how far they would fall. By the time the settlement was finalized, Andrew's shoulders carried a weight he could no longer disguise. He had signed the papers with a hand that trembled slightly, his jaw tight, as though clenching could hold back the truth. I walked out with the certainty that his world, so carefully constructed, was already beginning to collapse. But what neither of us admitted in that courthouse was that the unraveling had only just begun. The calls to his firm didn't stop. Rumors about his affair with my sister spread beyond whispers, reaching the ears of senior partners who valued reputation above all else. Andrew tried to carry on, but the cracks showed. I heard from a former colleague of his that clients had begun requesting different counsel, unwilling to attach their cases to a lawyer in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. The image of the rising star was slipping fast. Sasha, meanwhile, found herself clinging to a career that no longer wanted her shine. 3 of her clients ended contracts within weeks, citing conflicts of interest, though everyone knew it was the scandal. She tried to pivot, smiling through charity events and posting curated images online, but the comments told the story her captions tried to bury. Words like homewrecker and unprofessional clung to her posts until she began deleting them altogether. Her world, built on appearances, was shrinking by the day. One evening, just after sunset, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice held the caution of someone stepping onto fragile glass. "Claire, I want to see you," she said. For a moment, I almost refused, still carrying the sting of her early dismissal. But something in her tone stopped me. When she arrived, she looked older than I remembered, her eyes shadowed by regret. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had once cried alone over Andrew's betrayal. She folded her hands and said quietly, "I think I may have misjudged everything." The words settled heavy in the air. She spoke of Dad, how he had always said I was the strong one, though she had never understood what he meant until now. "I thought he meant nurturing soft strength," she admitted. "I didn't realize he meant backbone." It wasn't an apology in so many words, but it was the closest she had ever come. I listened, my chest both aching and relieved, knowing that something between us had shifted. The press turned its attention again, this time, not to me, but to Andrew's professional conduct. A local news station ran a segment about ethics in the legal field. Andrew's photograph flashing briefly on the screen as the anchor mentioned questions of financial irregularities. Margaret called the next morning. When you shine a light in dark corners, Claire, you often find more than you expected. Her words echoed in me for days. I watched from a distance as Andrew tried to salvage what was left. He trimmed his expenses, sold the second car, and moved quietly from the social circles he once cherished. The man who had believed himself untouchable was now forced to live in the shadows of his own choices. Sasha, once his partner in triumph, grew restless. I heard whispers that their relationship was strained, arguments spilling from restaurant tables, her voice sharp with frustration. Forbidden passion rarely survives when exposed to daylight. One afternoon, while walking through the market, I saw Sasha across the street. She looked thinner, her hair pulled into a severe knot, her phone pressed tight to her ear. She caught sight of me, paused, and for a moment her lips parted as though she might cross over. But she didn't. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, disappearing into the crowd. That fleeting glance told me everything. I no longer carried the weight of her choices. She did. Margaret and I met for coffee a week later. She looked satisfied, her sharp features softened in the glow of a small victory. You held the line, she told me. Most people give in when the pressure mounts. You didn't. I thanked her, though words felt small beside the truth of what she had given me. She had reminded me that silence wasn't my only option. But the greatest justice wasn't handed down in a courtroom or signed on a dotted line. It came slowly in the unraveling of the lives that had tried to erase mine. Andrew's career stalled, Sasha's reputation dimmed, and my mother finally saw me with clear eyes. For the first time in months, I felt the ground beneath me steady. Yet I knew one final chapter remained. Justice had been served, but closure, the kind that allowed me to step forward without looking back, was still waiting. And when it arrived, it would not be in their downfall, but in the life I was ready to claim for myself. The months that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. I moved into a small house in the Arts District, a place with brick walls that held warmth and windows that poured in morning light. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, untouched by betrayal, free of shadows that whispered of someone else's choices. Each room became a reflection of my own, rebuilding quiet and steady. Work began to grow in unexpected ways. Word of my designs spread beyond weddings and small businesses, reaching women who had heard my story and wanted their voices carried with the same clarity I had demanded for myself. I built websites and campaigns for women untangling themselves from silence, each project a reminder that strength could be shaped into something lasting. My mother started coming by on Sundays. At first, she tiptoed through conversation, careful not to mention Sasha or Andrew, her voice low with the weight of regret. Slowly, she opened up, admitting that she had not seen me clearly for many years. We talked about books, politics, the small things of daily life, and piece by piece, we built something new between us. She stopped looking past me to find someone brighter and began looking at me with respect. As for Sasha, the glamour dulled quickly. She tried to keep her footing in the fashion world, but whispers travel fast in small industries. Clients chose others, opportunities thinned, and her polished image lost its shine. I heard from acquaintances that she had taken a quieter position in another city, a job that paid the bills but didn't feed the ego she once carried like a crown. She tried to reach out more than once, leaving voicemails that swung between apology and desperation. I never returned them. Andrew's fall came harder. His name was mentioned during an ethics investigation at his firm, questions about finances that stretched beyond our divorce. The rising star who once measured everything in wins and losses was reduced to small cases in another state. His license was suspended for a time, and the man who once held himself above others now lived in the shadow of choices he could not undo. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't celebrate Sasha's either. What I felt was steadier than triumph. It was the quiet knowledge that justice had unfolded without my rage, only with my refusal to disappear. They had to live with the weight of what they had done while I moved forward free. Somewhere along that path, I met someone new. His name was Franklin, a teacher with kind eyes and an easy laugh. Someone who admired resilience instead of being intimidated by it. We went slowly building something based on honesty and respect, not convenience or performance. For the first time, I felt love as a choice, not a contract. Looking back now, I don't hate Andrew, and I don't hate Sasha. Hate is heavy, and carrying it would only keep me tied to them. But I also don't forgive them. Forgiveness would suggest what they did could be excused, and it can't. What I've chosen instead is to move beyond them entirely, to live a life where their betrayal is only a chapter, not the ending. The greatest lesson I carry is that silence is not strength when it means erasing yourself. True strength is standing up when others tell you to shrink, claiming your voice, even when they expect you to vanish. Every woman, every person has power, even if it lies dormant until tested. The question is whether you will use it. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most deeply to you. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this bring you strength, stay connected here for more.